This was the demonstrators' destination, Tiananmen Square, the heart of Beijing.
The world will never forget the men and women of Tiananmen Square in 1989.
Feng Zhi, was a scientist, and he had this intellectual clarity and no patience for sort of dogma or, party rhetoric. He wouldn't be intimidated in his calls for greater freedom. So at the beginning of 1989, he wrote this open letter to Deng Xiaoping, calling for the release of political prisoners. And at the same time, he had become the inspiration for what became known as democracy salons that were springing up on college campuses. At the beginning, it really wasn't clear how big a story this was going to be, especially for television. So I remember I was sitting at home on a Saturday afternoon playing with my dog and my kid, and the phone rang, and it was an editor from the CNN foreign desk saying that the wires, probably UPI, had reported that some guy named Hu Yaobang had died, and did we need to do anything about this? And my reaction was, well, he was purged a couple of years ago. He's not that important a figure now, so just have the anchor read a few seconds on air. It's just not going to be that big a story. Well, boy, was I wrong. By this point, we created a kind of informal alliance between UPI and CNN. We were both underfunded, struggling, the sort of underdog news organizations, and we helped each other wherever we could. And I got a call about 2 o'clock in the morning from Dave, one of my closest friends, and Dave told me that he'd gotten reports that students were marching towards Tiananmen Square, at which point I woke up Cindy and Mitch, and we grabbed the camera gear and headed off to the square. We got back to the bureau, and I called CNN headquarters in Atlanta. I said, we have this amazing story. We have to book a satellite feed. And at that point, a 10-minute satellite feed transmission cost about $2,000, and CNN hated to book unilateral feeds. They always liked to join when other networks were also feeding so that the cost could be shared around. But I convinced them that this was a big enough deal, so they agreed on a unilateral feed. So we crashed out this package, and as dawn was breaking, we raced through the streets of Beijing to CCTV, where we did the transmission. And it was interesting, when we sent the story, watching some of the technicians at Chinese TV, you could see they were excited by this. And so the story went out, and it was the first piece to air on American television about the protests in Beijing in the spring of '89. We were set up on the rostrum, the Gate of Heavenly Peace, the place where Chairman Mao had proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China. It was the place where he'd reviewed millions of Red Guards in the Cultural Revolution. And now we were broadcasting live from this place, all because the Chinese had planned to hold Gorbachev's welcoming ceremony in Tiananmen Square. On Tuesday morning, the day after Gorbachev's arrival, we went back to resume our live broadcasts from the rostrum. But when we got there, we discovered that the Chinese had rescinded the permission. A CNN engineer figured out that a signal from a microwave link in the square could be beamed down to Chinese TV headquarters, which would then beam it back across Beijing to the satellite dish at the CNN workspace at the Great Wall Sheraton Hotel, which would then send it up to the satellite, where it would then be downlinked in Atlanta and put on the air. It seemed crazy, but somehow it worked.
This was the demonstrators' destination, Tiananmen Square, the heart of Beijing, the seat of the government.
By about the middle of May, there is a real journalistic issue here. There's no question about that. A lot of the reporters who were covering the story were outsiders. They weren't based in Beijing. They'd come in for the Gorbachev trip, or later they'd come in just to help out as people got totally exhausted and burned out. So these were folks who really didn't have much experience in China. They didn't really know the place, its history, their politics, and I think that contributed to this sort of oversimplification of the narrative. And I think it may also have kind of created this false optimism, these raised expectations that this was all going to have a kind of happy ending. And when it didn't, then the reaction among the audiences in the States was even stronger. Here you have this goddess of democracy, which resembles the Statue of Liberty, right in the middle of Tiananmen Square. Right behind it is, overlooking the square, is the giant portrait of Chairman Mao, and it was a great shot, and the symbolism was very, very powerful. You know, there's another element in this issue of superficiality, and that is two grim-faced Chinese officials marched into the CNN workspace in the Great Wall Sheraton Hotel. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning on that Saturday morning, May 20th, and they said, "You have to stop your live transmissions in an hour." While all of this was happening, I was on a balcony of the Beijing hotel where I had a view down into the square, and the hotel room was the only place where we could keep a phone line open to Atlanta, and I was just reporting live everything that I saw and heard. I felt kind of like a sports announcer doing play-by-play of this huge event. And then right in the middle of this, Secretary of State James Baker appeared on CNN. He'd been previously scheduled to be on a CNN talk show. So the host comes to me and says, "Let's go to Mike Chinoy for an update." And I talk about, I see bodies and bullets and chaos and mayhem. And then the host turns to Baker and says, "Mr. Secretary, what's the U.S. policy on this?" I remember Cindy hid the tapes in Dave Schweisberg's car in the parking lot of the Beijing hotel to keep them safe. And then she came up to the room, and I gave her a big hug. I was near tears. We had no idea where she or Dave had been all night. So I was incredibly relieved to see that she was okay. And then she went and she got some cheese balls from a little packet and put them on a plate and gave them to me and said, "Happy birthday, Mike," because June 4th was my birthday. The man in front of the tank is unquestionably one of the great iconic images of the 20th century. It's up there with the little girl being hit running from a napalm strike in the Vietnam War, or the sailor kissing the girl in Times Square at the end of World War II. It's one of those great photos, and it's become a symbol of the individual standing up to the power of the state. A Chinese friend that the army was on the way, that there was a good chance they were going to raid the hotel, raid the workspace, and seize all our tapes. And so we were really concerned about preserving the record of what had happened. So I got in my car and I drove to the embassy, and McKinney Russell, who was the press counselor there, was a good friend, and he let me in. And when we got inside, he insisted only on writing me notes. He wouldn't speak because he was worried that even inside the embassy that it was bugged. And so we exchanged notes, and I explained I thought the army was coming and was going to seize our tapes. So they agreed we could keep the tapes at the embassy until things calmed down. The Chinese army did kill a lot of people in Beijing that night. And that's why decades later, the Chinese government is still extremely sensitive about any references to what happened in Tiananmen Square. As my old Chinese history professor once said, June 4th is a date that is going to haunt authoritarian governments in China for years.